So, this morning, I got a story to tell you. Many moons ago, I was a chaplain for Branch 62, a DF branch in Lewisburg, in Cape Breton. And I remember the weather was not like this. It was sleet and snow and 70 kilometers of wind. And after the service, we all ran into the Legion to have a community potluck, and we're sitting in the lounge. And I'm sitting with one of my friends who is a veteran of the Korean War. And we were sitting down, just catching up and sort of shooting the breeze. And I said to him, I really hope that we did you proud with the service. It's really important to me that we do that every time for all of you. And he's like, oh, Matt, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And then he just his eyes kind of settled on his beer. And you could see his face just change. And he lived with PTSD for his whole life after he served. And he said, Matt, the thing is, though, I don't need people to just remember. I need us to remember to live differently. We need to remember to live differently. And his words have stayed with me for a long time around this time of year because, like lots of us would acknowledge, peace is not just the absence of violence. I really think it's the presence of understanding. And if you at least want to understand somebody, you can disagree all day and night long with them, but if you want to understand them, right, there's that hope that we have relationship and connection and community together, right? That defines our humanity, that longingness to understand each other, because that is part of one of the many shades of love. And love defines us as human beings. If we don't have that want to understand each other, of which there's a grave shortage in the world today, then, you fear what you don't understand, right? And that leads us down this same cycle of choices that are rooted in violence, that's grounded in hatred and discrimination and paranoia and judgment and hate, where human beings start to become things. We transform each other into enemies that must be fought and disposed of or killed. We destroy our humanity. November 11th has to be more than just remembering a horrific cycle of violence. As my friend was pointing out, if we make the same choices and we choose the same behaviors over and over again and we expect a different outcome, there's a definition for that, and it ain't peace, right? It ain't peace. John McCrae said to us in Flanders Fields, here's the torch, hold it high. He wasn't saying, here's the torch, now turn around and go back into the trench where we just came from. He was saying, we've lived life in the trench. Take the light and lead us out. Don't go back there. Human beings have to find a different way to live together on this planet. He reminded me, my friend, that November 11th for me is about remember, live, and love. And somebody who did that so well in his ministry is Paul. And as Tammy was telling us, Paul did not have a fairy tale life. He faced the music so many times. Our ancestors suffered greatly for what they believed and the values they held. And yet, in spite of all that suffering, Paul says this amazing thing. It's one of my favorite verses in Romans. He says, yeah, but I remain convinced, despite everything that's happening to me and to the world right now, I remain convinced that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. I wonder, do you believe that? Do you believe that nothing can separate you from the love of God? When you go home and you turn on the news and you see what's happening in Ukraine, do you believe it? When we think about how the pandemic has literally rewired our brains in terms of our mental health because of the quarantine and the isolation, do we still believe it? When we think about people who are struggling right now just to put food on the plate and gas in the car and get to work if they've got a job and keep their housing secure, nothing gets in the way of the love of God, not even war. Speaking of that today, I want to share something with you. This is a beautiful book called Somewhere in Flanders. And it's a Nova Scotian book that lots of you probably didn't hear of because it came out in 2021 and there was a lot going on. But this is a collection of 70 letters written over 5 years by Jim Johnston, and well-known, prominent Nova Scotia family. And when Jim heard the call to serve in World War I, he immediately went to Valcartier. He got trained. He went overseas. And he writes his sweetheart, Isabel, in Halifax for 5 years while he is over there. And these letters document the journey, and it is an absolutely incredible work to behold. It's like $5 for you to go buy this book online. Like, go buy it, read it this week. You will not regret it as a Nova Scotian. He's got a unique perspective. And I just want to share one of his letters. He saw some of the worst fighting in World War I, Jim did. And so this is a letter he wrote in Belgium. It's the 20th of August, 1915, and he begins, "Dearest Chiquita," and we don't know why he calls Isabel that. Isabel spells her name the same way my Isabel does as well, which I'm fascinated by. But we don't know the history of where Chiquita comes from, but that's his little name for her. And he says, "Dearest Chiquita, just a few lines to you, dear girl, while I have a few spare minutes. I expect we go into the trenches again tomorrow night in a slightly different part of the line. I hope it will be as quiet as the last place we were, in that our casualties are just no greater. You know, I lost one of my chums the last time we were in the trench. He was certainly a fine chap, an Englishman by birth, but a mighty fine fellow all around. A sniper got him. Well, just now, everything is very quiet and the birds are singing away quite gaily. One would not imagine that within less of a mile from here that a war is going on, except now and again you can hear the crackle of rifle fire and machine guns or the distant boom of artillery. This house at which we're billeted seems to be the only one intact for miles around. Most of the others have been shelled to pieces. About half a mile away is what remains of what once was a prosperous village, and now it's deserted with just a few soldiers and lots of stray cats and dogs. The spire of the church has been struck twice by shells, and it looks for all the world as if some great hungry giant had taken 2 large bites out of the side and left the rest standing intact. Well, there's nothing much going on about here that I would be able to write about without it being censored. We have been digging trenches day and night and fixing things up in general ready for whatever comes. But when it does start, it will be a big one. I'm awfully glad indeed to hear that you enjoyed your trip to the country so much and that it was so good for you. Well, of course, I am always delighted to hear about the things that you see and do. Everything that is of interest to you, I like to hear about. Whatever put it into your head that I didn't? I received your letter of July 30th from Londonderry yesterday, but it must have been delayed somewhere or other as the Canadian mail came in about a week ago. Today's Friday, so there ought to be another mail trip, and I wonder if there will be a letter from the dearest of girls to me. I wonder and sincerely hope there is. You know, I am always half afraid that you will get tired of writing me. You know, we've kept up a correspondence off and on for nearly 5 years, haven't we? And I have written to you from all parts of places in Canada and quite a lot from this side of the Atlantic. I think I'd like to take all of your letters and place them in order and put them in some sort of file. They would make quite the book, wouldn't they? Just now overhead, there's an airplane sailing lazily over toward the German lines. In a few minutes, it'll be shelled. Well, I must close and write again when I can. Remember me. Goodbye, dearest. Yours ever, Jim. Jim never made it back to Canada. He was killed in action, and Isabel never talked about him. And it was after she got married and had kids, and her kids had kids, her granddaughter, Heather McBriarty, found Jim's letters among Isabel's things. And when she read that, went, I'm going to make a book. And I'm going to tell your story. Just an incredible piece of Nova Scotian work. I mean, it's just like you're right there. And Jim talks about life in the trenches, he says, makes you narrow as a human being. Right? What an expression. You become narrow. You don't care about anything or anyone. And it was Isabel's letters that would open his heart again and remind him that outside of this hell, there was love and there was life and there was a future worth hoping for. He talks about walking along ruined roads and cities and seeing little shrines of Jesus and Mary and going like, how did this survive? the onslaught, or being in a ruined church that had been literally pasted with artillery shells and the stained glass survived, and just standing there in wonder of the beauty in the midst of the destruction. Jim, nothing separated God's love from Jim. He was able to remember, to live, and to love. And if that's true for him, what good news for us today. You know, I got soul, but I'm not a soldier. Like Ian, you know, thank you, Ian, for today. You know, like Ian Moyes, who's here today, or like Dennis, you know, my nephew Bob, who's attached to a tank regiment, Rolly, who's here today. I'm not a soldier. So what can I do? How can I remember to live and to love? And for me, my friends, I don't know about you, but I throw all my heart, my mind, my spirit, and especially in the last 2 years, my whole body, into trying to cultivate a community of relationships that are grounded in Christ. You know, a community where we emerge that sense of community out of a deep sense of respect and listening, openness, compassion, generosity, and a spirit of joy and fun. Right? I want to try to create a community where there's an openness to the presence of the Spirit and the fostering of experiences that empower our awareness and connection with the holy, where we value spiritual learning and growth that nurtures and supports people on every stage of their journey in life, where we value everyone's participation in leadership as ministry, where we're working towards God's creation of sustainability and justice and peace for all creation. A community where we live with integrity that celebrates alignment between our words and our actions and enables courageous choices and risking challenge in fulfilling our mission. That's the kind of community I want to be part of. You all wrote those words in 2007. Part of the reason why I came here 4 years ago. You know, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I wonder, can anything separate us from each other? I think that's an important question to ask. You know, when I would come here a couple of years ago before the pandemic, you would walk into the porch and there would be a wave of energy that would just slap you in the face. There would be people laughing and carrying on and hugging each other. Children would be running around all over the place with cookies running down their chin because there would be cookies and there would be coffee and tea and people would be catching up through the week. And you come on in here and there'd be like 300 people in church and it would just be energy to lift the rafters from the ceiling. It's been a hard 2 years. You know, compared to when I started out in church, it breaks my heart to see what's happening to the United Church Canada right now. And it reminds me as well of the possibility and the chance that we have at Bedford United. You know, I can't help but think, I have people who say to me, Matt, I can't come to church because of the pandemic. No, but I saw you on Instagram at the Michael Bublé concert. There's a couple thousand on there, buddy. I don't really think it has to do with the pandemic for you. I don't think you're really immune compromised. I think you're just lazy. It's easy to get caught in that, though. But man, the difference that happens when we all gather together, those of us who can, and online, those of us who gather on Sunday morning together and have that connection in real time together, is beautiful. You know, we think about the torch that John McCrae talks about, and I just think about, we have that. This is our torch, right? There are not a lot of these spaces across this country of ours that are affirming, that understand what's happening with racism, that understand what's happening with the environment, that want to raise our kids in generation to generation with these values. This is rare, and it's becoming extinct. And the world needs Bedford United more than it ever did. So, come on and get involved. We need you right now. And you know what gives me hope is a story Caitlin told me, who's filling in for Paige as she's on parental leave. Caitlin said to me this week, right, this is what lifts your heart. She's like, you know, Matt, there was a mom in church who, started coming to BUC with her kids 2 years ago. And then the pandemic came. She's like, I can't go to church in person because I got to really worry about my kids and stuff. But she made a commitment, and she said, you know what? I'm not going to book anything for Sunday morning. We're going to leave our Sunday mornings open, and we're going to go to church as much as we can online. And no matter what happens to us, we're going to keep that time free because one day we'll go back to church. They were in church for the first time in 2 years last week, right? Talk about remember live, love. That's what this is about. I mean, we can watch it whenever, but it's the community gathering together in real time where we remember the relationships that connect us to the Spirit. And we remember and worship by singing and praying and teaching together what our faith is all about so that we can go out in the world and share that light that is in all of us. You know, the Spirit calls us and needs us to remember to live love like this generation has never done before. The torch is ours, so let's hold it high with all of our heart, our mind, our body, and our spirit, so that those before us can really rest in the peace that we remember, and we live, and we love, and we make that path of peace by how you and I are going to walk it together. Friends, the Spirit in me honors the Spirit in you. And all the people said, Amen.